Kansas City Sports Update Studios. Welcome to Kingdom Radio, where we talk about all things Kansas City Chiefs. Brought to you by Arrowhead Update. Join Chris and Richard on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Player FM, CastBox, and all third-party applications. Check us out on Facebook platforms such as Kansas City Sports Update and Arrowhead Update. And if you cannot find us there, Google or search Kingdom Radio and Kansas City Chiefs, and you will find us. Welcome to the Kingdom. Kingdom.
How are we doing, Kansas City? Welcome to Kingdom Radio. I am your host, Richard Smith, and with me, as always, we have our senior NFL analyst and co-host, Kris-Chavez. Chris, it's been a while. It's been a couple weeks since we have done a show. Free agency is in full effect. The new league year has started. The new collective bargaining agreement has been passed and is put in place, and some things are going to change here within the NFL. Our depth chart, Chiefs depth chart, has been changing as well. Chris, take off on whichever way you want to go. And let's talk some Chiefs. It's been a while, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Staying bunkered down in my home and staying safe and doing my part to not pass this coronavirus or participate in any way, shape, or form in sharing it with anybody.
Well, let's talk about that real quick before we get into football, because this, as everyone knows, has turned into a worldwide pandemic, and more cases are popping up, in the States overnight. And, I've read some articles to say the States have surpassed China as far as the amounts of positive tests for coronavirus. But everybody just do your part, isolate yourself, practice the social distancing and everything that, has been brought to the table. Each state has their different regulations, and wherever you live, please just practice safe distancing, because it might not affect you personally, but it's starting to get to the point where somebody knows somebody with the virus. So it's extremely important that we all heed all this advice and keep moving forward cautiously. So that's really what I want to say about the coronavirus. I didn't mean to hop in there, Chris, but I think it's really important. Chiefs Kingdom is a family, and no matter where you live in the world, I think each and every one of us wants the best for each other, and for that to happen, you got to practice it, everything that the government and, the health regulators have set in front of us. So, Chris, with that, thank you for practicing your social distancing. I'm glad that you are safe and you are healthy as well. So let's hop right into this, Chris. I'll let you take off wherever you want to, because we have a broad spectrum to break down on this show.
Yeah, so just to kind of jump right into free agency, focusing primarily on the Chiefs, we have re-signed and franchise tagged 4 players to come back to the team. We've got Chad Henne, our backup quarterback. He's re-signed on a 2-year deal. We franchise tagged Chris Jones, who is, as soon as he signs the tag or the contract, he'll be on a 1-year deal with the Chiefs, unless we can come up to a long-term deal with him, which we still have until, I believe, sometime in June to sign that deal. Otherwise, he'll just have the 1-year deal, and we won't be able to talk another contract with him until the next offseason.
Let's talk about Chris Jones just a little bit here. I'm sure we'll be getting into, the depth chart and the significance behind these players walking and us re-signing franchise tags, however it is going down. But at this point, as we have watched, Reggie Ragland walk, and Kendall Fuller, Emmanuel Ogbah, Jordan Lucas, and those are just to name a few. How important is it that the Chiefs get a deal done with Chris Jones outside of the franchise tag? Because obviously we have to pay Jones a hefty bill this season. But do you see the Chiefs stretching, a long-term contract out with Jones after, signing Frank Clark and everybody who has walked, because the cap space is not very forgiving for the Kansas City Chiefs this season?
I think it's going to be extremely pivotal to kind of see how this season goes. I think that we're going to have to wait until next offseason because by Chris Jones' standards, this year was a down year for him as a defensive tackle.
Right.
In the 4-3 defense. If he had put up similar numbers to last year with, let's say, 12, 14 sacks, having switched from a 3-4 to the 4-3, I think you'd have to scream, pay the guy. But because injuries kind of collected up there at the end, as well as a little bit of a downturn on his production this year, I think that the Chiefs are going to be a little cautious as to whether or not they sign a long-term deal at as high of a price as Chris Jones is probably asking for. I think that both sides want to have a long-term deal signed, but it's just a question of the money and can they agree on that.
Right. Okay, so, and that's the $1 million question for the Chiefs right now. Amongst all the other issues that Kansas City needs to take care of within its depth chart, how many holes are there right now? 19?
Yeah, there's about 18 or 19 right now. And as you and I talked about earlier this morning, I actually looked ahead to next year's roster, and we're going to have 36 holes in the roster next year.
Now, keep in mind, Kansas City, before you let that number freak you out, that just depends on the draft this season. It also depends on, the undrafted free agents. Everything that Kansas City does this offseason also reflects what's going to happen next offseason. And I look for 36 to go down. I think any man with a, level head on his shoulders would realize that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to fill some gaps here with 19 holes in the depth chart. I think that they're going to seal a few deals to bring that number down low for next season.
Well, we'll have to start to look at extending players because all of those 36 contracts are up at the end of next year. That's disturbing.
Now.
Yeah, because if you look at this year and next year, or combined, that's 50 guys on the roster whose contracts are up this offseason and next offseason.
Right, correct. But also keep in mind this was a complete restructure of a core, and a lot of these players were expendable, and as much as they were assets to the Kansas City Chiefs this past season, I feel like they were assets to this team because of the core that was put in place, as well as coaching. So it looks really bad on paper right this second, but in the same respect, I feel like the Chiefs are going to fill these holes with reasonable players and put the Chiefs back in a position, to make a run at the Super Bowl, because the offense, that's the key. That's the key. The offense is the key for the Chiefs. And, keeping a formidable middle-of-the-pack defense is really all the Chiefs need. And I'm really happy with, the play and production of the Honey Badger and Thornhill and Frank Clark. Okafor will be back this season. Then there's also, Chris Jones. There's a lot of things to look forward to. It's just, I feel like there's more holes within this depth chart and, next season's depth chart than the Chiefs have seen in a long while.
Yeah, and like you said, a lot of these guys are role players in the scheme of things, whether it be our offense or our defense. And as long as we keep our core unit together, the likelihood of us being successful increases that much more.
Right.
And I think the question that we come across when we start talking about Chris Jones is he that pivotal piece of our defense that we have to have? And I've heard arguments both ways on that, and
right.
I feel that he is a necessary piece. However, when he was out, well, it took us a while, but we were able to find players who could fill in at the defensive tackle position and have a rotation that could at least fill the gap that Chris Jones left.
I personally, my take on it is Chris Jones was not expendable before the Kansas City Chiefs signed the Honey Badger and Frank Clark. Once both of those players were signed and the anchor was set on the defense, that ultimately made Chris Jones expendable.
Yeah, I could definitely see and agree with that argument as well. Plus, then you also look at the rotation at the defensive tackle position. Excluding Chris Jones, you've got Noddy, who we invested a high draft pick in.
Right.
You have Colin Saunders, who we also invested a high draft pick in. And then we also brought in Mike Pennell.
Right.
And so with those three, that's three deep at defensive tackle that we have a very strong investment in at the position. And not taking anything away from what Chris Jones has done, but you keep investing in that position. Eventually, you're going to want to get what am I looking for? Payoff on your investment.
Right.
And so we'll be looking to see what can Derek Noddy do, what can Colin Saunders do, and given that we invested second and third round picks in these guys, we're going to want to see what they can do on the field. And it kind of like what we're doing at wide receiver right now, we are hindering the development and by holding on to somebody that maybe we should look at potentially letting go.
You know, another person to slide in that position. You know, this is your guy. I'm going to touch base on your guy right now. You know, since I have known you, this has been your guy. K-Pass. You know, why don't we let him step into the interior and see what he can do, and look at him as a possible replacement for Chris Jones. I know he's not as big a body, but he's a strong body, long, huge arms. It'd be interesting to see what he could do as far as clogging the run and getting his arms up.
Yeah, I think that K-Pass moving inside on third downs was really important in the second half of the season. He primarily lined up at defensive end, but every once in a while he would rotate in as a defensive tackle. And with those big, long arms, he adjusts the quarterback's throwing angle, and the quarterbacks have to adjust for that. Same thing with Chris Jones. I mean, he had 3-4 knockdowns in the Super Bowl.
Correct.
And I think with Okafor, I believe it was Okafor, maybe it was Ogba, who also was leading the league 2 years ago in knockdowns. It's like we have a wall of defensive linemen who can knock the ball down. And it's a nice commodity to have. And honestly, this is a good problem for Kansas City to have, of having too much talent. And, wondering whether we should or shouldn't keep a guy. The one thing that I also want to throw out there about Chris Jones is, let's say that we sign him to a 5-year, $100 million contract, $20 million a year. That's going to be roughly about $200 million that we have tied up in our defensive line just at two positions.
Correct.
And we're probably going to end up having to have some sort of open door policy at linebacker and in our secondary, because we won't be able to afford to bring in and re-sign those talented players that we have. Charvarius Ward, he's going to be up for a renewed contract here soon. Are we going to have the money to pay him what he truly is worth? Or are we going to let him walk?
Right.
Over the last season and a half that I've seen him, everything that I've seen from him has said, pay the man.
Correct. I think at this point, the Chiefs strongly need to look at moving Chris Jones. As much as we have invested emotionally in Chris Jones throughout the last three seasons, this is a financial standpoint. If the Chiefs can move one player and bring in three players in talent, why wouldn't you move that player who's going to take so much of the cap room? Especially, Chris, this is the players that are still undetermined, up in the air. The Chiefs could re-sign or they could walk. Darren Lee, Xavier Williams. I don't see Xavier Williams coming back. Terrell Suggs hasn't given them any kind of indication. Spencer Ware, Cam Irving, Morris Claiborne, and Bashad Brayland. So those are the players that still are up in the air. And let's be honest, Chris, every one of those players could clear up a large amount of cap room. And then you ship off Chris Jones as well. That's a lot of cap room opening up for the Chiefs.
Yeah, and we're going to be looking at, let's see, right now, Chris Jones is counting, I believe it's $16 million against our cap.
Right.
And, it's definitely a nice buffer that we would really enjoy, but it's also something that we could have had if we had let Sammy Watkins go. And in regards to Sammy Watkins, the fact that we didn't release him before free agency tells me that we're going to be keeping him on the roster because we lost out on a lot of top talent that we could have afforded it with that cap space. And so, given the type of franchise tag that we gave Chris Jones, where it was non-exclusive, to where other teams could work out a deal with him, they could talk to him, and essentially work out some sort of trade with the Chiefs or compensation, whatever, for signing him. Nobody really bid on that, or nobody at least agreed to terms with whatever Chris Jones was looking for.
Right.
Because we're now 2 weeks into the agency, and he's still out there. And so, again, I think the Chiefs were trying to get the compensation in, and if somebody wanted him bad enough, but nobody did. They signed Derek Wolfe, they signed Michael Brockers, and several other defensive tackles ended up going and signing deals, but they didn't go after Chris Jones. And I think that teams were not willing to part with the draft capital that it would have required to pry him away from the Chiefs.
And so here's a big thing too, and that is, that's speculation. We can't say one way or another right at this point if that was exactly it, because it's no secret Chris Jones is a commodity. I don't think no teams were knocking. I don't believe that. I believe that. Look, I'm sure the Chiefs want to keep him. They'll do whatever it takes to keep him. But in the same respect, when I look at the depth chart as a whole, and I think about being a GM, and I think Brett Veach's mindset and what he has built up to this point, when you have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, and your entire offense is a core for the whole team. Every single starter on the offensive side of the ball plays such a critical role in everything that is the Chiefs. I'm obviously, as a GM, weighing more on the offensive side of the ball than I am the defense. And if I have a choice, am I, keeping Chris Jones or am I keeping Sammy Watkins? Well, I'll say this. Chris Jones definitely will bat the ball down, and he'll get you pressure on a quarterback. But I'll tell you this. Chris Jones won't throw 4 touchdowns and a quarter. You can't throw a touchdown to Chris Jones, obviously, unless it's a pick six, and that rarely happens. Now, on the other hand, I would have to say Sammy Watkins is a more valuable asset to the Chiefs at this point with the future and where Kansas City is going, especially with the depth chart the way that it is. if I'm the Chiefs and I have all these holes on the offense, I'm for sure not giving up any pieces on the offense. Especially one that's so prolific and puts up as many points as the Chiefs do. I'm not giving up any of those weapons. I'll give up Chris Jones before I give up Watkins all day. And I know that might seem a little bit contrary to the situation, but in the same respect, we need this high-powered offense if we can't keep a lot of that defense.
Yeah, and I totally hear what you're saying, and I can't really disagree with that.
So, we've talked about the holes, right? Okay, there's 19 holes right now. We had talked about the defensive side of the ball, who has walked, who's been signed by other teams. Blake Bell has also walked. LaShawn McCoy, the Chiefs aren't bringing back. Steve Wisniewski, I believe, signed with the Eagles. That was one the Chiefs would have liked to have back, but just couldn't, come to terms. Signings. Let's talk about an interesting signing. The Chiefs went to the XFL and signed Jordan. How would you pronounce that? Ta'amo? Yes, Jordan Ta'amo, quarterback from St. Louis Battlehawks in the XFL. I personally, Chris, we had talked about a scenario, I'm not sure if it was midway through the season or before the season started, about getting a backup quarterback who would complement Patrick Mahomes. The Chiefs can constantly be cycling out quarterbacks into the league with superior talent. And what a way to kick that off than bringing in a guy, like Ta'amu. And what is your thoughts with that? Because that's an interesting signing, and this guy has above average skill set, but just needs polished.
Yeah, he's by no means the mold of any of the other quarterbacks that we have on the roster. Chad Henne and Kyle Fuller are nothing like.
Hey, you're muffled. Start that over, brother.
Okay, sorry. So Gordon Ta'amu is a very athletic quarterback, which is very different than Chad Henne or.
All right, we had a little bit of technical difficulties here, but we're going to hop right in this. We're talking about the Seattle Battlehawks, or St. Louis Battlehawks quarterback, Jordan Ta'amu, or whatever his name is. Excuse me. But, Chris, let's talk about him a little more, because his skill set is special, and we had talked about, previously that the Chiefs could bring in a quarterback to, really build and generate some revenue and some capital for the Chiefs, and this seems like the perfect prototype to get in here underneath Mahomes. So let's talk about him a little bit.
So Ta'amu is going to offer a more athletic quarterbacking type, in which the NFL model is really moving into, and the backup that we currently have on the roster with Henne and Firmer, those are more of the pocket type. And so Ta'amu is going to be a different mold, and we're going to get a different look out of the offense with him potentially behind center.
It'll be an interesting project, that's for sure. The Kansas City Chiefs also signed Antonio Hamilton, a defensive back from the New York Giants, as well as Mike Rimmers, an offensive tackle from the Giants. And both of those are interesting moves because, when the Chiefs signed Antonio Hamilton, most fans were kind of like, who is that? He's only started a few games in his career, but he has a decent 40 time. Okay, I'm going to say better than decent. He's extremely fast piece and could probably add some decent depth to the Chiefs' defense. Mike Rimmers, offensive tackle. I find it always an essential asset to be adding any type of interior offensive line, especially when the Chiefs are in need. So those three signings, while underneath the radar, were probably a great depth signing, as well as on a financial standpoint, because the Chiefs got all three of these players on a pretty low contract.
Yeah, the other thing about Hamilton is that he's also a special teams ace.
Okay, so Chris is breaking up really bad, but he said that Hamilton is a special teams ace. And look, I look forward to seeing the production out of all three of these players, especially with all these gaps that are needing to be filled. And so Anthony Sherman was another big signing that the Chiefs had, and the biggest one that we really haven't even touched base on yet, Demarcus Robinson. I think Chiefs Kingdom would have been happy either way, even if he would have walked, if we would have re-signed him. But there is some importance behind keeping a player like Demarcus Robinson and the depth for the offensive side of the ball. So, Chris, let's talk about that a little bit. You had wrote an article on kckingdomradio.com about why it is so critical to keep a player like Demarcus Robinson around. So take off on that. What do you have for us?
Well, D-Rob is going to be familiar with our offense. He's going to be able to step in, and we're not going to lose a step. Our offense is still going to be the same offense that we've been putting out there all last season.
All right, so more technical difficulties, but we'll have that. That's a part of broadcasting. But we are talking about Demarcus Robinson, and the Chiefs signing a one-year deal with him and the significance that he holds within the Kansas City Chiefs offense at this point. So, Chris, go ahead and take off. I know that you started before, but you were breaking up, and we couldn't really understand what you're saying. Go ahead and take off here with about Demarcus Robinson and, kind of give Chiefs Kingdom a little feel of why we brought him back and what his significance and role is in this Kansas City Chiefs offense.
So signing him back is going to be a great deal for Kansas City. Not only did he come back cheaply, but he's familiar with our offense. He's familiar with our quarterback and what we're looking to do. If we had brought in a free agent, if we had brought in a rookie, there would be a learning curve with getting them familiar with the offense. And so this works out for both player and team. The team, we have some familiarity there that we can still keep performing at a high level that we're already at, as well as D-Rob is going to be able to have another year of some more consistent performance. And so going into next year's offseason and hopefully putting up the same numbers or better numbers than he did this year, maybe then he'll have a little bit more of a market and be able to sign with somebody else. I think he's really looking to be a number 2 wide receiver with another team, but with the consistency that he could and should have in the Kansas City Chiefs offense, he should be able to get that this year.
And, that's one of those things that, unfortunately, for Demarcus Robinson in the era that he came in, the Chiefs are really, stepped it up and came to the plate as far as, our receivers, as far, McCole Hartman and Sammy Watkins and Tyreek Hill. He's an understandable fourth piece for the Chiefs, but in the same respect, on any other team, he is a number 2 receiver. So this could really work out in his benefit if he has a huge season here. It also depends on how much Andy-Reid utilizes him in the system, and how the season goes. I think that is a great pickup for the Chiefs. This a 1-year deal. I think that the leverage is in both favors, with the Chiefs and with Demarcus Robinson. And he can really be an asset. He knows the offense. I think that's the biggest, critical part of this whole scenario. But also look for the Chiefs to go nab up a receiver in this deep draft that they have at receiver. It's just a good, sure sign that the Chiefs are doing their best to keep the core pieces, of a puzzle that has just been clicking on all cylinders when healthy. And I just, in no way is this a bad signing. Releasing him wouldn't have been bad either. And Chris, you and I had talked about that. But I'm happy about this scenario. It couldn't have worked out better for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I definitely think that it was probably the best case scenario for the Chiefs and for D-Rob as well.
Okay, so look, we have gone through the depth chart here. We've talked about who has walked. We've talked about who the Chiefs have signed, who they've released. The new players coming in. Let's talk a little bit about draft strategy before we touch base on some of these other NFL signings that can impact the Chiefs and obviously will, because there's some big names that move around the NFL. But let's talk about draft strategy, because as we all know, the Chiefs are hard pressed on linebacker and cornerback. And if I was a reasonable GM, I'd go after interior offensive line and wide receiver as well, and possibly tight end. But Chris, as far as linebacker is concerned, that is the Chiefs' number one issue. Is that what the Chiefs are looking for right now as far as the number one pick, without trading up or trading back?
I think first and foremost, we need to be looking at cornerback. We have too many holes at cornerback right now. We only have 3 cornerbacks on the roster, and one of them is a very big project. And so we need 2 starters. Well, not necessarily 2 starters, but 1 starter and 1 quality depth piece at least. And then we'll probably either get a really cheap free agent or get an undrafted free agent. But I think that the Chiefs need to go cornerback in the first round and then linebacker in the second round. Or if there's a can't-miss linebacker in the first round, then we need to go cornerback with the next 2 picks.
I think that's the only underlying issue here is, cornerback is deep and linebacker truly is not. And I guess it depends on how the dominoes fall, which one will come first. But the impact, the first and second round for the Kansas City Chiefs is probably more critical this season than it has been since Brett Veach has been the GM. So, and this really lies for the draft all around. This is a big draft for the Chiefs, and they need to come out perfect, solid, have depth in the draft like Brett Veach has typically shown, in his tenure. But I think this year is more important than most.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, like we touched on earlier in the show, next year we're going to have a lot more holes that we're going to need to fill, and to have more quality depth or more quality talent on the roster that we don't have to worry about replacing 1 year after is going to be very important for us to not have to worry about. And so it's going to be very pivotal for Veach to nail this draft out of the park. And honestly, I think that if he trades back with any of the picks, nobody can really fault him for that. Even if he ends up losing a little bit of value, the more picks that he has, the more chances that he has to, quote-unquote, hit the jackpot with every pick. And looking at his history, that's typically what he does.
Yes, and honestly, a lot of the premier talent, that would last, to make a franchise player, a lot of that falls in the middle rounds. The 2 and 3, sometimes 4. You find really, really quality players, in depth if you're looking in the right places and you have the right scouts. And as a Kansas City Chiefs fan, if you're not trusting a guy like Brett Veach at this point, I don't know what GM you would trust.
Yeah, Brett Veach has done nothing but given us example after example after example of why to trust him and his scouting staff when it comes to the draft.
And that's a testament to his scouting days before becoming a GM in Philadelphia. And it doesn't just start with the Chiefs. The man has had a brilliant career, and I feel like this is going to be the biggest test. And I will say that if the Chiefs knock 1 through 3, round 1 through 3 out of the park, the Chiefs are in great shape, and I feel like that Brett Veach is going to get it done. I trust his views. I trust his decisions. I trust the teams ahead of us and their needs and everything that goes into this. I trust it. It's a little bit scary on the outset looking in, looking at 19 holes in the depth chart. But, like you said, next season we're looking at 36 if things don't change right this second, which obviously they will. Now, Chris, the last big question I want to ask you before we start talking about some of the big free agents that's moved around the league is, do you think the Kansas City Chiefs are still in a position to go back to the Super Bowl, given all the holes in the depth chart? Do you think it's possible?
Absolutely, because the only pivotal pieces to our starting roster that we're missing is a starting cornerback and a starting linebacker. And even then, we have a linebacker. We have three linebackers who had the most snaps for us last year. And so while we lost the starter, we didn't lose our overall big performer. And so to be realistically only missing two key components in the big picture, I think we're absolutely armed and ready to repeat as Super Bowl champions next year.
And I couldn't agree more with you. I know that we're lacking in a few positions on the defense, but I will say this. The Kansas City Chiefs were lacking in those positions last season, and what happened? The Chiefs went out and got those pieces strategically, in a way that only Brett Veach could pull off. And I see the exact same thing happening, within the next decade. So, like you said, go get a cornerback, get a linebacker, boost that defense up. Obviously, the draft is more defense heavy. I would say, outside of offensive line and possibly wide receiver, because the draft is so deep, everything should be on the defensive side of the ball. Especially with, let's transition into some of these other NFL teams. Look, we've really touched base on the Chiefs and talked about everybody who's gone, came, went, who's here now, who have been signed. Now let's talk about why these signings are so significant, because players like Tom Brady, moving to the Bucs, Teddy Bridgewater going to the Panthers, Phillip Rivers, the Colts, DeAndre Hopkins to Arizona, Todd Gurley to Atlanta, and Atlanta. Chris, you had sent me a picture describing Atlanta, and they're the only team, in the Super Bowl era to have all first-round picks on their offense. There's some big-time moves going on, even with the Raiders, the Broncos, the Chargers, huge moves. So how important is it for the Chiefs to maintain what they're doing, especially since, all these other teams are making huge pushes?
Well, a lot of these teams are making moves to try to improve their defenses, to try to, in some way, shape, or form, combat what the Chiefs are throwing at them. I think that it's going to be very important for the Chiefs to now raise up their defensive performance. If we continue to see the defense that we saw the second half of the year last year, where we were essentially the number one, number two defense in the league, if we can come out swinging like that and perform like that all season long, everything that the teams in our conference, in our division, that they've done this year to try to combat us will all be for naught, because they're focusing primarily on their offensive side and not their defense. They're focusing on their defense, not their offense. And so if we can have that complete team again going into the year next year, we're going to be head over heels above where everyone else is at, even though they think that they're getting better this year.
And I think it's just a testament to the system the Chiefs have built, starting from the front office down to the coaches. I think Chiefs Kingdom, we were spoiled this past season and forget how much the defense was actually rebuilt, throughout this process. And, McCole Hardman was a new piece. This is not any different than the season before. We're just putting numbers out there, and the numbers sound scary. I feel like the Chiefs are going to put the same product on the field this next, this upcoming season with new names, and possibly add to the core, within the draft and rookie contracts and such. I'm more excited about the transition than I am nervous.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an exciting time in Chiefs Kingdom, because what we see here in the next, I'll say, year and a half is going to be extremely exciting to see what what direction we're going with the offense and the defense, and can we transition from quote unquote Team A into Team B that's going to be the core team for the next 5-6 years down the road. And then hopefully somewhere down that road, we're going to end up needing to transition into Team C. But we're going to have the kingdom constant of Patrick Mahomes taking snaps under center, and that's going to be the most important part.
Absolutely. I mean, it ultimately comes down to scoring points. And, those points come from the offensive side of the ball. Obviously the defense has put up some points, but realistically, that core on the offense, it has to stay. Has to stay. Defensive players are expendable. Special teams players are expendable. But this offense, the Chiefs are trying to make this the best offense ever in the history of anything. And I love the fact that they're keeping this core together. I mean, they're keeping every single piece of that offense together, and I love it. Look, Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers, both of those players, look out for the Bucs and look out for the Colts. This is a situation where the Chiefs needed this offense, and the Colts were stepping up their defense. The Bucs already had a defense. This is a scenario where some teams, Arizona is making a huge difference on their offense. So you see this progression of all these teams trying to keep up with Kansas City, and the Chiefs just need to keep doing their thing, keep pushing, keep grinding, keep it in the same direction, and really nothing can go wrong. Like you said, as long as the Chiefs have a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes underneath center, the sky is the limit. And then you have the talent around him that the Chiefs are obviously keeping together. It's hard to win a Super Bowl and keep every single piece of offense together, and the Kansas City Chiefs did that. They did exactly that. So that's something to look forward to as well. Chris, look, it's been a while since we've been on. We've gone through a lot of stuff. We've gone through free agency. We've gone through, the depth chart, draft strategy, the players that have walked, the players the Chiefs have re-signed, released, some players from the other league, the players that are still up in the air for the Chiefs. Is there anything else that you want to add to this podcast tonight? Because, hey, look, we have seriously covered some tracks, and I'm happy with everything that we've talked about.
This is way off base, but just because I know that it's kind of in the area, with the model of quarterback that is now the prominent physique in the NFL, I just want to throw out there that Tommy Frazier, quarterback from Nebraska way back in the early 90s,
yeah,
I think that he was before his time. If he had been quarterback right now, coming out, he would be in extremely high demand because he was one of the, I'd say probably one of the top 5, top 10 college quarterbacks of all time. Definitely one of the best ones I've ever been able to see in my lifetime. And it was just too bad that he was before his time, before the athletic quarterback, the mobile quarterback really made a move in the NFL.
And I personally think, from that standpoint of what you're talking about with Tommy Frazier, even though that did come way out of left field, but I do want to say this. As times have changed in the NFL, before it was a stubborn NFL with a stubborn mindset, and you fit the system of an NFL coach. And nowadays, it has been proven that the best success is of a coach who molds his system around the players. And we're watching that, unfold right in front of our eyes here in Kansas City. And honestly, it's almost at a point where, the Chiefs are the front runner for, the model of building a depth chart around the talent that you have on your team instead of trying to mold the talent on your team into, something that they are not. So, Chris, that is a really, really great point, and I'm glad that you brought that up because the Kansas City Chiefs are the epitome right now of building a talent-based depth chart, solely on the strengths of the players and not the coach.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and a lot of like you were saying, the rest of the NFL is following suit. They're starting to do what Andy Reid has been doing ever since his days back in Philadelphia with Donovan McNabb. And they're seeing how successful he's been with that process, and now they're starting to emulate that, which I think is a huge testament to how Andy Reid has affected the NFL game.
Yes, and I also want to I want the NFL and the fans to take heed on this as well. Andy Reid has always had a great quarterback, under his arm at the helm of any team that he has coached. But in the same respect, there was a lot of talent there for a lot of years. But what I think was lacking was leadership. And not from Andy Reid, from the quarterback. From the quarterback that Andy Reid gave all the marbles to and said, hey, this is in your hand. I want you to take our team to the Super Bowl. He said that to our kid, Patrick-Mahomes, and Mahomes said, okay, you know what? I'm going to give you that, and I'm going to give you more because I am a leader, and I have that do-or-die attitude, that kill shot. It doesn't matter what time of the game. It doesn't matter what scenario in the game. The Kansas City Chiefs have that game breaker that the NFL's never seen before. And so now the trust level between coaching and quarterback is astronomical. And I think it's just a testament, of Andy Reid and everything that, he's been through and what he stands for all the way through his coaching career to finally land this guy named Patrick Mahomes who just raises the bar for everything that anybody thought the quarterback position represents. So it's, Chris, I agree with you. It's nice to see a depth chart built around his talent. And with that, that's a great way to close, Chris. As the draft is coming up here in, 3 weeks. 3 weeks the draft is coming up. And the Chiefs have all these decisions to make. And now it's time. It's time. It's crunch time. And I'm excited to see what happens here. So, Chris, it's been a while. We said this last time in Chiefs Kingdom. We'll be back on here more. We just needed a break. I'm ready to go. I know Chris is ready to roll. The draft is right around the corner. It's time to get back here. Within all the events that are going on this season. So, Chris, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it, as always.
Of course, absolutely, anytime.
All right, well, that is Kris-Chavez, Kingdom Radio co-host and senior NFL analyst. I am Richard Smith, host of Kingdom Radio, Kansas City. That is our podcast today. With all of you in quarantine and separating yourselves from everybody and practicing social distancing, I expect our numbers to go up. No excuse, Kansas City. Get on this podcast and check it out because, Chris and I we got some great knowledge to drop on you. We just invite you to pick our brains here on Kingdom Radio. And then go to kckingdomradio.com because we're writing blogs and articles, and this podcast stemmed from an article that Chris had wrote about DeMarcus Robinson and the impact that his signing has, this coming up season for the Kansas City Chiefs. So, check out all of our content, podcast, go to the Facebook page, KC Kingdom Radio, and really follow us. We're constantly keeping up on the free agent tracker and everything that is Kansas City Chiefs. Go check out our apparel. There's all kinds of stuff. Just search us. Search KC Kingdom Radio. You'll find all kinds of content in Kansas City. With that being said, you all have a wonderful evening. What is it? Sunday. Yes, have a wonderful evening with your family. Stay secluded and tune in to KC Kingdom Radio.
Thank you for tuning in to Kingdom Radio, your go-to podcast for everything Kansas City Chiefs.